At my grandson's engagement party, his fiancée said, "If it weren't for that old woman, we'd be married by now." An hour later, I canceled the venue and the catering. The surprise came on the honeymoon. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I've been through a lot in my 70 years, but nothing quite prepared me for what happened at my grandson's engagement party. Clark had been the light of my life since he was 8 years old, when his parents died in that terrible car accident. I raised him as my own, gave him everything I could, and watched him grow into a wonderful man. So when he announced his engagement to Elodie, I was thrilled. I thought I was gaining a granddaughter. How wrong I was. The party was held at the country club where Clark's fiancée insisted it had to be. Everything had to be perfect for Elodie. The flowers, the champagne, the guest list. I'd offered to help with the arrangements, but she made it clear my input wasn't needed. Still, I showed up in my best dress, a pearl necklace that had been my mother's, ready to celebrate. I should have known something was off when Elodie barely acknowledged me during the receiving line. She gave me one of those fake smiles that never reaches the eyes and turned her attention immediately to the next guest. But I told myself she was just nervous. Wedding planning can be stressful. The real blow came during the speeches. Clark had just finished thanking everyone for coming, his face glowing with happiness as he talked about his future with Elodie. Then she took the microphone. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice sweet as honey. "Clark and I are so excited to start our new life together. We've been planning this wedding for months now, and honestly, if it weren't for this old woman constantly interfering and slowing everything down, we would have been married already." She gestured toward me with a laugh that made my blood run cold. The room fell silent. I felt every pair of eyes turn to me, saw the mixture of embarrassment and pity on people's faces. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe, but I smiled. I smiled that same smile I'd perfected through decades of dealing with difficult people, through sleepless nights caring for a grieving child, through every challenge life had thrown at me. I even raised my champagne glass slightly, as if toasting her words. Clark looked confused, glancing between us. "Elodie, I don't think Grandma Geneva has been—" "Oh, Clark, you're so sweet," she interrupted, patting his arm condescendingly. "You always see the best in everyone. That's why I love you." The conversation moved on, but I remained frozen in that moment. This woman, this person my grandson loved, had just publicly humiliated me in front of 50 people. She'd called me an old woman who was interfering with their happiness. Me, the person who had sacrificed everything to give Clark a good life. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment to collect myself. My hands were shaking as I gripped the marble countertop, staring at my reflection. 70 years old, yes, but I wasn't frail. I wasn't some doddering grandmother who didn't know her place. I was Geneva Morrison, and I had raised a man who was worth 10 of that manipulative little girl he was planning to marry. When I returned to the party, I moved through the crowd with purpose. I found the caterer first, pulling him aside with a gentle touch on his elbow. "Excuse me, dear," I said quietly. "I need to speak with you about next weekend's arrangements." "Of course, Mrs. Morrison. Is there a change to the menu?" "Actually, yes. We need to cancel everything." His eyes widened. "Cancel? But the wedding is in 6 days. We've already prepared." "I understand, and I'll cover any cancellation fees. But the event is off." I handed him my card and moved on to the florist, then the band leader. Each conversation was brief, polite, and final. Yes, I would pay the penalties. Yes, I was sure. No, they shouldn't mention this to anyone tonight. The venue coordinator was harder to convince. "Mrs. Morrison, surely there's been some misunderstanding. Mr. Clark was just here confirming the final details." "There's no misunderstanding. The Morrison family will not be hosting a wedding next weekend." By the time I'd made my rounds, the party was winding down. Clark found me near the coat check, his brow furrowed with concern. "Grandma Geneva, are you feeling all right? You seemed upset earlier." I patted his cheek gently, the same way I had when he was a little boy afraid of thunderstorms. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. It's been a long evening." Elodie didn't mean anything by what she said. She's just stressed about the wedding details. I smiled again, that same calm smile I'd worn all evening. "Of course, dear. I understand completely. As I drove home that night, my phone started ringing, the caterer, probably, or the florist, wanting to confirm the cancellations. I let it ring. Tomorrow would bring chaos, confusion, and probably anger. But tonight, I sat in my quiet house, sipping tea from my favorite cup, and planned my next move. Elodie thought she could dismiss me as just some old woman getting in her way. She had no idea what this old woman was capable of when someone threatened her family. The phone calls started at 6 in the morning. Clark's voice was frantic when I finally answered. "Grandma Geneva, there's been some kind of mistake. The caterer says you canceled everything." The venue coordinator called Elodie crying. "What's going on?" I set down my coffee cup carefully, watching the steam rise in the morning light streaming through my kitchen window. "There's no mistake, Clark. But why would you? I don't understand. The wedding is in 5 days. Was in 5 days," I corrected gently. The silence stretched between us. I could hear Elodie's voice in the background, shrill and demanding, though I couldn't make out the words. "Can you come over?" Clark asked finally. "We need to talk about this." "Of course, dear. I'll be there in an hour." After I hung up, I walked through my small house, remembering. The walls were covered with pictures of Clark growing up, his first day of school, Little League games, high school graduation, college. What those pictures didn't show was what it had cost me to give him those opportunities. When Clark's parents died, I was 58 and living comfortably in a 3-bedroom house my late husband had paid off. I had a small but adequate pension and was looking forward to a quiet retirement. Then suddenly, I had an 8-year-old boy who had lost everything, and quiet retirement became a luxury I couldn't afford. I sold the house and moved us into a 2-bedroom apartment closer to better schools. I took a job at the department store, standing on my feet 8 hours a day, so I could afford the tutoring Clark needed to catch up academically. When he wanted to play baseball, I worked overtime to pay for equipment and league fees. When he showed aptitude for science, I sacrificed my own meals sometimes to afford the advanced classes. I never told him about the nights I sat at the kitchen table, trying to stretch $20 until the next paycheck. I never mentioned that my feet were so swollen some evenings I could barely get my shoes off. I wanted him to feel secure, loved, and normal. As normal as possible for a boy who'd lost his parents. By the time Clark graduated high school, I'd spent my entire retirement fund and taken on debt I'm still paying off. But watching him walk across that stage, knowing he'd earned a full scholarship to college, made every sacrifice worth it. The drive to Clark's apartment took me through the old neighborhood where we'd lived during his teenage years. The small duplex where we'd shared cramped quarters for 6 years still looked the same, peeling paint and a yard that needed attention. I'd been so proud when Clark moved into his current place, a nice apartment in a good part of town. His engineering degree had opened doors I could never have imagined. That's where he'd met Elodie, at some young professionals networking event. She worked in marketing, came from money, and seemed charmed by Clark's genuine, straightforward nature. At first, I was happy he'd found someone. He deserved love, companionship, a partner to share his success with. But I started noticing changes. Clark would mention plans we'd made, our monthly dinners, his help with my computer problems, holidays we always spent together, and then cancel at the last minute. "Elodie has something planned," he'd say apologetically. Or, "Elodie thinks it might be better if we start our own traditions." The monthly dinners became quarterly, then twice a year. The easy conversations we'd always shared became stilted phone calls with Elodie's laughter in the background, cutting him off whenever he talked too long with me. She never said anything directly negative about me to Clark. She was too smart for that. Instead, she used subtle suggestions and manufactured emergencies that always seemed to coincide with our plans. When I arrived at their apartment, Elodie answered the door. Gone was the sweet mask she'd worn around others. Her expression was cold, calculating. "So, the old woman has some fight in her after all," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "May I come in? I'd like to speak with Clark." She stepped aside reluctantly. Clark was pacing in the living room, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked exhausted. "Grandma Geneva, please help me understand this. The wedding is ruined. Elodie's parents are flying in tomorrow. The guests, The dress? He trailed off, looking lost. I sat down on the couch I'd helped him pick out 2 years ago, before Elodie's influence had redecorated everything in stark whites and grays. "Clark, do you remember what Elodie said about me last night?" He glanced at his fiancée, who was standing with her arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. "She was just stressed. Planning a wedding is hard work. She called me an old woman who was interfering and slowing things down, in front of 50 people. It wasn't that bad," Elodie interjected, but her voice lacked conviction. I looked at my grandson, this man I'd raised, and saw something that broke my heart. He was making excuses for someone who had publicly disrespected the woman who'd sacrificed everything for him. Not because he agreed with her, but because he'd been slowly conditioned to prioritize her feelings over everyone else's, including his own. "Clark," I said quietly, "when have I ever interfered with your relationship? When have I ever asked you to choose between us?" The apartment fell silent except for the ticking of the expensive clock Elodie had insisted they needed. Clark sank into a chair, the weight of the question settling on him, and that's when I realized something that chilled me to the bone. Elodie wasn't just dismissive of me. She was dangerous. She was systematically isolating Clark from the one person who truly loved him unconditionally. The question was, why? I left Clark's apartment that morning with more questions than answers. But one thing was crystal clear. I needed to know exactly who Elodie really was. The sweet, ambitious young woman Clark described and the cold, calculating person I'd encountered didn't match up. That afternoon, I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. Marcus Webb had been recommended by my neighbor's daughter, who'd used his services during a messy divorce. He was a soft-spoken man in his 50s who met me at a coffee shop downtown, listening patiently as I explained my concerns. "Mrs. Morrison, I have to ask, are you sure you want to go down this road? Sometimes families are better off not knowing certain things." I thought about Clark's face that morning, the way he'd looked so lost and confused. "My grandson is about to marry this woman. If there's something I should know, I need to know it." Marcus nodded and pulled out a small notebook. "Tell me everything you can about her. Full name, where she works, where she's from, how long they've been together." I shared what little I knew. Elodie Marie Calloway, 28 years old, worked at Henderson Marketing downtown. She'd told Clark she was from Portland originally, had a degree from Oregon State, and they'd been dating for 18 months. "I'll start with basic background verification," Marcus said. "Employment history, education, credit check if possible. Give me 3 days." Those 3 days felt like an eternity. I went through my normal routines: grocery shopping, my book club meeting, lunch with my friend Dorothy, but my mind kept wandering to what Marcus might discover. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that Elodie was just immature and thoughtless, not malicious. Marcus called on Thursday evening. "Mrs. Morrison, can you meet me tomorrow morning? I have some information you need to see." His tone told me everything I needed to know. I barely slept that night. Friday morning, I sat across from Marcus as he spread several documents across the table between us. My hands trembled as I reached for my reading glasses. "Let's start with education," he said quietly. Elodie Calloway never attended Oregon State University. In fact, there's no record of her attending any 4-year college. My stomach dropped. But she has a degree. She works in marketing. The degree on her wall is fake. A very good fake, but fake nonetheless. As for Henderson Marketing, he slid another paper toward me. She was fired 6 months ago for falsifying client reports and inappropriate expense claims. But clerk thinks she still works there. She leaves every morning, comes home talking about her projects. Marcus nodded grimly. She's been spending her days at coffee shops and the mall, using credit cards to maintain appearances. Speaking of which, he showed me a credit report that made my head spin. She has over $60,000 in debt across 8 different cards, all maxed out. I stared at the numbers, trying to process what I was seeing. How does she afford her lifestyle? The clothes, the apartment she shares with Clark, the engagement ring, that's where it gets interesting. Marcus pulled out another file. I found records of 3 previous relationships, all with financially stable men. Each relationship lasted approximately 18 months to 2 years. He showed me printouts from social media accounts, photographs of Elodie with different men at expensive restaurants, vacation destinations, formal events. In each photo, she was wearing expensive jewelry, designer clothes, looking every inch the successful young woman. What happened to these relationships? They all ended abruptly, usually around the time the men started asking serious questions about marriage or shared financial commitments. In 2 cases, there were restraining orders filed. My mouth went dry. Restraining orders? Marcus flipped to another page. David Chen, a software engineer from Seattle. According to his statement, Elodie became increasingly controlling and manipulative when he refused to add her name to his bank accounts after 6 months of dating. When he tried to break up with her, she threatened to destroy his career by filing false harassment claims. He showed me another case. Robert Martinez, a doctor from Phoenix. Similar pattern. She moved in with him, started isolating him from friends and family, then became hostile when he wouldn't propose after a year. When he ended things, she vandalized his car and spread rumors about him to his colleagues. I felt sick. This woman wasn't just after Clark's money. She was a predator who systematically targeted successful, lonely men and manipulated them until they served her purposes. There's more, Marcus said gently. I found her real employment history. She's worked a series of retail and service jobs, never lasting more than a year at any of them. Usually fired for theft, lying to customers, or conflicts with management. He handed me a final document, and this is the most concerning part. She's currently receiving unemployment benefits under a false claim, stating she was laid off from Henderson Marketing due to company downsizing. That's unemployment fraud. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed. My grandson, my sweet, trusting Clark, was being systematically deceived by a woman who saw him as nothing more than a meal ticket. Mrs. Morrison, I have to ask, what are you planning to do with this information? I looked at the pile of evidence in front of me, proof that the woman Clark loved was a fraud, a manipulator, someone who would destroy him emotionally and financially if I didn't act. I'm going to save my grandson, I said quietly, even if he hates me for it. Marcus gathered up the papers and handed me copies of everything. Be careful. Women like Elodie don't give up easily when their schemes are threatened. She's going to fight back. As I drove home, my mind was already working. Clark was supposed to leave for his honeymoon on Sunday, a trip to a luxury resort in the Caribbean that I now knew Elodie had insisted on, and that Clark was paying for entirely. But maybe, just maybe, that trip could work in my favor. Sometimes the best place to corner a predator is somewhere they think they're safe, somewhere they let their guard down. I picked up my phone and dialed the resort's number. Yes, I'd like to book a room for this weekend. It's somewhat urgent. I need to surprise my family. Clark called me Saturday evening, his voice strained with exhaustion. Grandma Geneva, we managed to put together a small ceremony at City Hall. Just immediate family. I know you're upset about everything that happened, but... He paused, and I could hear Elodie's voice in the background, sharp and insistent. But we're leaving for our honeymoon tomorrow. Maybe when we get back, we can all sit down and work things out. My heart broke listening to him try to smooth over the situation, still trying to keep everyone happy even after everything that had happened. Of course, dear. You have a wonderful trip. I love you, Grandma Geneva. You know that. Right? I love you too, Clark. More than you know. After I hung up, I finished packing my small suitcase. The flight to St. Lucia left early Monday morning, which would put me at the resort by Tuesday afternoon. I'd paid extra to ensure my arrival would be a complete surprise. That night, I spread Marcus's files across my kitchen table one more time, studying every detail. I needed to be absolutely certain of my facts before I confronted Elodie. There would only be one chance to get this right. The flight was long, and I spent most of it thinking about what I would say. How do you tell someone you love that their entire relationship is built on lies? How do you prove to someone that the person they just married is a fraud without destroying them in the process? The Coral Bay Resort was even more luxurious than the website had suggested. Pristine white beaches, crystal clear water, and accommodations that probably cost more per night than I spent on groceries in a month. I checked into my ocean view room and immediately called the concierge. I'd like to surprise my grandson and his new wife, I explained. They're staying here on their honeymoon. Clark and Elodie Morrison, the young woman at the desk, smiled warmly. How lovely. They're in the Sunset Suite. Would you like me to arrange something special? Actually, I was hoping to find out their schedule. I don't want to interrupt if they have activities planned. She consulted her computer. Let's see. They have couples massage appointments tomorrow afternoon at 2, and dinner reservations at our premier restaurant at 8. Oh, and Mrs. Morrison has a spa day booked for Thursday, the full treatment package. Of course she did. I thanked the concierge and spent the rest of Tuesday observing from a distance. I spotted them at the pool, Clark looking relaxed for the first time in months, Elodie photographing herself constantly, posing with tropical drinks and designer sunglasses that I now knew were paid for with money Clark didn't know he'd already spent. Wednesday morning, I positioned myself in the resort's main lobby with a book and a cup of coffee. At exactly 10:30, Clark appeared, wearing swim trunks and carrying snorkeling gear. "Clark?" I called out, as if surprised to see him. He spun around, his face cycling through confusion, shock, and something that might have been relief. "Grandma Geneva? How did you?" I stood up and embraced him, feeling how thin he'd gotten in just the past few weeks. I wanted to apologize for the wedding situation. I thought maybe if I came here, we could talk without any pressure or distractions. But this place is expensive. "You can't afford—" "Don't worry about that, sweetheart. Where's Elodie?" His expression tightened slightly. She had a headache this morning. She's resting in the room." Even on their honeymoon, she was finding excuses to avoid activities that didn't revolve around her. "Well, maybe we could spend some time together. Just the two of us? Like old times?" For the first time in months, Clark smiled genuinely. "I'd like that." We spent the morning walking the beach, and I watched my grandson slowly relax as we talked about everything except his marriage. He told me about work projects, his plans for the future, dreams he used to share with me before Elodie had started monopolizing his time. But I also noticed things that worried me. He was constantly checking his phone, texting someone, presumably Elodie, updating her on where we were and what we were doing. When I suggested lunch at one of the beachside cafes, he hesitated. "I should probably check on Elodie first, make sure she's feeling better." "Of course. Why don't you invite her to join us?" Clark's face fell slightly. "She's not really... She doesn't like the heat, and she's very particular about where she eats." Translation: Elodie didn't want to waste time with me when there were spa treatments to be enjoyed and expensive activities to experience. At lunch, Clark seemed distracted, barely touching his food. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. "Clark, are you happy?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean really happy. You seem different lately, stressed." He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the ocean. "Marriage is an adjustment. Elodie has very specific ideas about how things should be. She comes from a different background than us, you know? She's used to nicer things." My heart ached listening to him make excuses for her demands, her selfishness, her complete lack of consideration for his feelings or his budget. "Clark, there's something I need to tell you about Elodie." He stiffened immediately. "Grandma Geneva, please don't. Not here. This is supposed to be our honeymoon." "That's exactly why I need to tell you here, before it's too late." "Too late for what?" I pulled out a manila envelope I'd been carrying in my beach bag. "I hired a private investigator to look into Elodie's background." Clark's face went white. "You did what?" "She lied to you, Clark, about everything. Her education, her job, her past. She's not who you think she is." He stood up abruptly, knocking over his water glass. "I can't believe you would do something like that." "That's insane, Grandma Geneva. That's stalking." "Clark, please, just look at the evidence." "No." His voice was sharp, angry in a way I'd never heard before. "I'm not going to look at whatever lies you've paid someone to fabricate about my wife." Wife. The word hit me like a physical blow. It was too late. They were already married. "I'm going back to the room," Clark said, his jaw tight. "I think you should go home." I watched him walk away, my chest tight with panic. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I'd thought if I presented him with facts, with proof, he'd see the truth. Instead, I'd only driven him further into Elodie's web. But I wasn't giving up. If Clark wouldn't listen to me, maybe it was time for Elodie and me to have a direct conversation. And this time, I wouldn't be the polite, accommodating grandmother she thought she could dismiss. This time, I'd show her exactly what happens when someone threatens my family. I found Elodie at the resort spa the next morning, reclining by the adults-only pool with a mimosa in her hand and her phone positioned for another selfie. She was wearing a bikini that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, her hair perfectly styled despite the humidity. "Well, well," she said without looking up from her phone screen. "The old woman tracked us down. I have to admit, I'm impressed. That took some real stalker-level commitment." I pulled up a chair beside her lounger, noting how she instinctively shifted away from me. "We need to talk, Elodie." "Actually, we don't. Clark already told me about your little conspiracy theory folder. Hiring a private investigator? That's not just crazy, it's probably illegal." She finally looked at me directly, and I saw something in her eyes that made my blood run cold. Not anger or defensiveness, but amusement. She was enjoying this. "You lied about your education," I said quietly. "You lied about your job. You lied about everything." Elodie laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Prove it." I opened the manila envelope and spread the documents across the small table between us. Her fake diploma, her credit reports, the employment records, the restraining orders from her previous victims. For the first time, her composure cracked slightly. She glanced around to make sure no other guests were within earshot, then leaned forward. "You have no idea what you're messing with, old woman. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. A con artist who preys on good men." Elodie's mask slipped further. "Good men? Your precious grandson is pathetic. Do you know what he said when I told him I wanted a $10,000 engagement ring? Whatever makes you happy, sweetheart. When I said I needed a new wardrobe for work events, he opened his credit card without asking a single question. My hands clenched around the papers. Because he loves you. Because he's weak," she spat. "Just like all of them. They're so desperate to believe someone like me could actually want them that they'll bankrupt themselves trying to keep me happy." "Someone like you?" Her smile turned vicious. "Young. Beautiful. Out of their league. Clark knows he got lucky and he'll do anything to keep from losing me. He even cut his own grandmother out of his life." The casual cruelty in her voice made me feel sick. "Why him? Why Clark?" "Because he has a steady job, no debt, and a grandmother who clearly has money she'll leave him someday. Plus, he's got that whole tragic orphan backstory that makes people want to help him succeed. Perfect husband material for someone looking to upgrade her lifestyle." She gestured around the luxurious resort. "This honeymoon? $15,000. The wedding ring? $8,000. The designer clothes hanging in our room? Another $5,000. All on Clark's credit cards, which he'll be paying off for years while I enjoy the benefits. What happens when the money runs out?" Elodie shrugged, sipping her mimosa. "Same thing that always happens. I find a reason to leave. Maybe he develops a gambling problem. Maybe he becomes abusive. Maybe he just can't satisfy me anymore. Doesn't really matter. By then, I'll have what I need to move on to the next one." I stared at her. This beautiful young woman who spoke about destroying lives like she was discussing the weather. "You're a monster." "I'm practical. Men like Clark need women like me to give their pathetic lives meaning. I provide a service. I make them feel special, desired, important. The fact that it costs them everything? That's just the price of admission. And what about when Clark finds out the truth?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. "He won't. Men like him don't want to know the truth. They want to believe the fantasy. Even when the evidence is right in front of them, they'll find ways to explain it away rather than admit they've been played." She stood up, gathering her things with deliberate slowness. "Face it, Geneva. You already lost. Clark chose me over you. He married me, not you. And if you keep trying to interfere, I'll make sure he never speaks to you again. You underestimate what a grandmother will do to protect her family." Elodie laughed again. "What are you going to do? Tell him about your little investigation? He already thinks you're a crazy old woman who can't accept that her precious grandson has grown up. Push too hard, and you'll just prove his point. She was right, and we both knew it. Direct confrontation had failed. Clark was so deep under her spell that evidence wouldn't be enough. I needed something more dramatic, something that would force Elodie to reveal her true nature in front of him. "Enjoy your last day of marriage," I said quietly. Elodie paused. "What's that supposed to mean?" I smiled, the same calm smile I'd worn at the engagement party. "It means I'm not done yet." That afternoon, I returned to my room and made several phone calls. First to Marcus, asking him to fax additional documentation to the resort's business center. Then to the resort concierge, requesting a special dinner arrangement for that evening. Finally, I called Clark's room. "Clark, honey, I wanted to apologize for yesterday. You were right, this is your honeymoon, and I shouldn't have brought up unpleasant topics." He sounded relieved. "Thank you, Grandma Geneva. I know you're just looking out for me, but I understand. Would you and Elodie join me for dinner tonight? I'd like to celebrate your marriage properly and then head home tomorrow." There was a pause. Probably while he consulted with Elodie. "That would be nice. The Sunset Terrace restaurant at 8? Perfect. And Clark? I love you. Nothing will ever change that." As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. Tonight, Elodie would finally face consequences for her actions. Not from me directly, but from the truth she'd worked so hard to hide. Sometimes the best way to expose a predator is to give them exactly what they think they want, then watch them destroy themselves with their own arrogance. The Sunset Terrace restaurant was everything the resort's website had promised. Elegant tables overlooking the ocean, soft lighting, and the kind of atmosphere that made people lower their guards. I arrived early and requested a quiet corner table where we could speak privately. Clark appeared promptly at 8, looking handsome in a dinner jacket, but tired around the eyes. Elodie glided in beside him, wearing a dress I now knew cost more than most people's monthly rent, her smile bright and predatory. "Geneva," she said warmly, kissing my cheek like we were old friends. "How lovely that you wanted to celebrate with us." The performance was flawless. If I hadn't spent the previous day listening to her real thoughts, I might have believed this sweet, devoted new granddaughter-in-law was genuine. We ordered drinks and made small talk about the resort, the weather, their plans for the rest of the honeymoon. Clark began to relax, probably relieved that I wasn't bringing up any uncomfortable topics. Elodie regaled us with stories about their wedding day, painting herself as the perfect bride grateful for Clark's devotion. Halfway through dinner, I excused myself to the restroom. On my way back, I stopped at the maitre d's station. "Excuse me, but there's a gentleman at the bar who's been staring at our table. He seems to recognize my grandson's wife. Could you ask him to join us for a moment?" The maitre d' glanced toward the bar where Marcus Webb sat nursing a scotch, then nodded professionally. "Of course, madam." I returned to our table just as the waiter was clearing our main course plates. "That was delicious," I said, settling back into my chair. "You know, this whole trip has reminded me how important family is, how important it is to really know the people we love." Clark smiled. "I'm glad you feel that way, Grandma Geneva. It means a lot to have your blessing." "Of course, dear. Though I have to admit, I've been curious about Elodie's family. We haven't had much chance to talk about your background, sweetheart." Elodie's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh, there's not much to say. Small family, very private people. Still, I'd love to hear about your college days at Oregon State. What did you study?" "Communications," Elodie said smoothly. "Very practical degree. And your job at Henderson Marketing must be exciting? What kind of campaigns do you work on?" Clark beamed proudly. "Elodie's the creative genius behind their social media strategies. She's being considered for a promotion to senior account manager." I nodded admiringly. "How wonderful. It's so rare to find someone who's both beautiful and accomplished." That's when Marcus appeared at our table, his expression serious but polite. "Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help noticing. Aren't you Elodie Calloway?" The effect was immediate and devastating. All the color drained from Elodie's face, her carefully maintained composure cracking like an eggshell. Clark looked confused. "Actually, it's Elodie Morrison now. We just got married. Do you two know each other?" Marcus pulled out his phone, showing a photo on the screen. I'm a private investigator. Miss Calloway here is wanted for questioning in a fraud case in Phoenix. She bilked my client out of $30,000 before disappearing. There's been some mistake, Elodie said, her voice strained. No mistake, Marcus continued calmly. 3 different victims, same pattern each time. You target successful men, move in fast, rack up debt in their names, then vanish when things get too serious. Clark stared at his new wife, confusion giving way to something like horror. Elodie, what is he talking about? It's all lies, she snapped, but her panic was showing. Clark, don't listen to him. Your grandmother hired him to destroy our marriage. Marcus set several documents on the table. Bank records showing fraudulent credit applications. Employment verification from Henderson Marketing confirming you were fired 6 months ago for falsifying reports. And restraining orders from 2 previous victims. Elodie, Clark's voice was barely a whisper. Is this true? For a moment, she tried to maintain the facade. Baby, you know me. You know I would never. Answer the question, Clark said, his voice stronger now. Did you lie about your job? Your education? Everything? Something shifted in Elodie's expression. The sweet mask finally fell away completely, replaced by cold fury. Fine, she spat. Yes, I lied. About all of it. Happy now? Clark recoiled as if she'd slapped him. Why? Because you're pathetic, she said viciously. You and every other desperate loser who thinks he can buy love with credit cards and jewelry. You want to know the truth? I've been laughing at you for months. Poor little orphan boy. So grateful for attention from a pretty girl that he'll bankrupt himself trying to keep her happy. The words hit Clark like physical blows. I watched my strong, successful grandson crumble before my eyes. I never loved you, Elodie continued, her voice dripping with contempt. I don't even like you. You're boring, predictable, and weak. The only thing interesting about you is your bank account, and even that's not that impressive. Elodie, stop, I said quietly, but she was beyond caring now. And you? She turned on me with blazing eyes. You sanctimonious old witch. You think you've won something here? You've just destroyed your precious grandson's happiness. He'll never trust anyone again, never open his heart to another woman. Congratulations. You've made him as bitter and alone as you are. She stood up abruptly, throwing her napkin on the table. I'm going back to the room to pack. Clark, if you're smart, you'll wire me $50,000 to keep quiet about this whole embarrassing situation. Consider it a divorce settlement. You'll get nothing, Clark said, his voice hollow but determined. Elodie laughed harshly. We'll see about that. I know things about you, Clark. Things your precious grandmother wouldn't want getting out. She stalked away, leaving us sitting in stunned silence. Other diners were staring now, whispers rippling through the restaurant. Clark buried his face in his hands. How could I have been so stupid? I reached across the table and took his hands in mine, the same way I had when he was 8 years old and afraid of thunderstorms. You weren't stupid, sweetheart. You were loving. She took advantage of that, but it doesn't make your capacity for love a weakness. Marcus quietly gathered up his documents. I'll make sure the proper authorities are notified about her location. She won't be able to pull this scam on anyone else. After he left, Clark and I sat in silence, watching the sun set over the ocean. Finally, he spoke. I'm sorry, Grandma Geneva, for everything she said to you, for not listening, for choosing her over you. You have nothing to apologize for. She was very good at what she did. How did you know? What made you suspicious enough to hire an investigator? I thought about that moment at the engagement party when Elodie had called me an old woman who was slowing things down. She made a mistake. She let me see who she really was for just a moment, and I recognized something dangerous. What am I going to do now? The marriage, the debt, the humiliation? I squeezed his hands. Now you come home with me. We'll figure out the practical stuff together. The annulment, the credit cards, all of it. But first, you heal. Clark nodded, tears finally coming. I love you, Grandma Geneva. I'm sorry I forgot that for a while. I never doubted it for a second. Later that evening, as we packed Clark's things from the honeymoon suite, we found that Elodie had taken everything of value, jewelry, electronics, even Clark's good watch. But she'd left behind something telling, a notebook filled with detailed notes about Clark's finances, his work schedule, his emotional vulnerabilities, and his relationship with me. It was like reading a predator's hunting manual, clinical and cold. She planned all of this from the beginning, Clark said, staring at pages of calculated manipulation. Yes, but she underestimated something important. What's that? I smiled, looking around the empty room that should have been filled with honeymoon memories. She underestimated what a grandmother will do to protect her family. 6 months later, Clark and I were closer than we'd ever been. The annulment had gone through quickly once the fraud evidence was presented. Clark had managed to recover most of the debt through insurance claims and legal action. Elodie had been arrested in Miami attempting to run the same scam on another victim, but the real victory wasn't legal or financial. It was watching my grandson rebuild his confidence, his trust in his own judgment, his capacity for genuine relationships. He'd learned to spot manipulation, to value authenticity over performance, to trust the people who truly loved him. And on quiet Sunday evenings, when we shared dinner and talked about everything and nothing, I knew I'd done the right thing. Some bonds can't be broken by lies or manipulation or time. The love between a grandmother and her grandson, that's unshakable, even when the world tries to tell you otherwise. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.